In this video, we'll be wrapping up our Introduction to Visual Web Developer 2005 Express Edition and ASP.NET 2.0. And we'll talk about the practical matters of getting all of your hard work onto a web server so the whole world can use it. So we'll briefly revisit a couple of seemingly disparate topics which all fall under the heading of configuring, building, and deploying a website. Let's start with the importance of using the web.config file to create application settings. Now, we've already alluded to the powerful utility of the web.config file a couple times. For example, we showed how it can be used to set up and manage the debugging, tracing, and custom error page for our website. Now, the truth is that there are many things that can be managed in this way, like database connection strings, security settings for individual files, as well as entire folders, and actually a whole lot more. But it can also be used to store settings that your application needs. Settings that you may need to change occasionally, and so you don't want to make the changes to the source code in order for the application to behave properly. Now, you never want to hard code values into your source code. So, realistically, what are your options? Well, with ASP.NET, your best option is to create an application setting. And the good news is that, just like we saw in the previous videos, you can use the website administration tool to help you manage these settings. So you can see that I have a new project called Lesson 10 CS. The first thing that I want to do is add a new web.config. So I'm going to go to Web Configuration File in the Add New Item dialog, and I'm going to select the Add button. Now, as you can see, there is already an Apps Sections and a Connection Strings element that are empty right now in the system.web. As we looked at in the past, you have your compilation, debug setting, authentication, even custom errors, all commented out. And we've looked at these on a couple occasions throughout the series of videos, so I'm not going to take the time to go into them right now. What I am going to do is close down this file, and then I'm going to go to either my little button on the Solution Explorer, ASP.NET Configuration, or to the ASP.NET Configuration tool that we've been using. And as you can see here on the opening page on the Home tab, that there's an application configuration link, or we can select the application tab. Either one of those will take us to the application tab. And we can see the little box on the left-hand side is for application settings. Let's go ahead and click the Create Application Settings link. This will allow us to put a name-value pair. In this case, I'm going to put my test as the name and my value as the value, and then click the Save button. And it'll tell us that we have successfully created an application setting. I'm going to click the OK button, and I'm going to shut down our web administration tool. And I want to reopen the web.config file, and now you can see that the app settings section of our config file is no longer empty. Instead, it has an add key equals my test, value equals my value. So we could just go ahead and type additional key value pairs in here in the app settings, or we can continue to use our handy dandy ASP.NET configuration tool. But the real question now is, how do we retrieve the value into our application so that we can do something meaningful with it? So let's go ahead and close this down. And now let's go ahead and open up our toolbox. Let's actually grab a label and a button control. And let's go ahead and try to get a move this down there. There, that's what I wanted to do. And now I want to change this so the text property is gone. Great. Okay, so what we want to do is whenever we click the button, we're going to retrieve the value out of the web.config file and then display it in our label control. Okay, so here in our protected void button 1 click event, we are going to type a little bit of code. We're going to go with connection manager. We'll go with configuration manager dot app settings dot get, and then we're going to pass in the name the name value pair. In this case, it's my test. And what we'll do is we'll set that to label1 dot, let's do that again, label1 dot text. Okay. And so that should be pretty obvious what we're going to do. We're going to, whenever the button is clicked, we're going to grab the value that's associated with the my test moniker by using the configuration manager object's app settings get method. Okay. And we're going to put that value into our label. So let's go ahead and run our application. It asks us if we want to add the section that allows debugging within our web.config file. And by the way, we may want to set this equal to false whenever we deploy our application. And so now we have our default.aspx page. I click the button and it retrieved my value from the web.config file. So hopefully you can see that this is pretty powerful. You should never have to hard code any values that should or rather that need to be changed within your application. You can instead store them in a web.config and then retrieve them out for whatever purpose that you might need. The Visual Web Developer team made deploying your application extremely easy. So what we'll do is we'll deploy this example out to a web server that's currently hosting ASP.NET 2.0. And that's an important distinction to make. Whenever you're choosing a host, a hosting company on the internet, you have to explicitly ask them which version of ASP.NET that they support. If you've developed an ASP.NET 2.0 application using Visual Web Developer 2005 Express Edition, you have to deploy it to a web server that contains the .NET Framework version 2.0 runtime, as well as all the support files that ASP.NET 2.0 will need in order to correctly run the application. The same thing is true if you're trying to deploy to an intranet application within your organization. So let's begin by selecting either the copy website or copy website option from the menu. And by doing so, we'll bring up kind of an FTP type interface here within our main area. The first thing that we need to do is connect to our server where we're going to deploy this application. So I'm going to select the connect button. You can see here that I've already got some settings from a previous session. This is indeed the IP address that I want to deploy the application to. And notice that by default, in my case, it went to the FTP site. Now, depending on what your previous selections were, it'll either go to the file system, to the local Internet Information Service, or to a remote site. So just be aware that there is this selection of options on the left-hand side that will change the target on the right-hand side. Okay, but we're going to work with FTPing our files over to our hosting company server. So I want to add a username and a password. So this is Learn Visual Studio in my case. And I'll just paste in the password. And I'll select the open button. And so now it goes out to the internet, finds all the files, and displays them in this right-hand column that are currently hosted on that web server. So we can see on the left-hand side are the local copies of our files, and on the right-hand side are the files that currently exist on the target server. Now what we can do is simply just select all the files that we need to upload, and then select either the synchronized selected files between the same relative paths in the source and remote website, which would basically bring the default page.htm page, as well as any other folders that are contained here, down onto my local instance, and then upload all of my files to this server. But most of the time what we're going to want to do is deploy from our local instance of our application out to the target web server. So we're going to select this top button, copy selected files from source to remote website. Okay, it'll take a couple of minutes to do this depending on how fast your internet connection is. In my particular case, it went pretty quickly. So now all we need to do is test our application. So we'll need to bring up a web browser. And I think we've already got this in our menu, so let's go ahead and select this, and we'll change this to default.aspx. And you can see now our application is live on the internet. We can click the OK button, and it works. So deploying your application is extremely easy using Visual Web Developer 2005 Express Edition. It's merely a matter of copying your files, FTPing them up, or whatever have you up to the target web server. Okay, so near the very beginning of this series of videos, I talked about how ASP.NET works. And just as a reminder, the first time a web page with a .aspx extension is requested from your application folder, all of the VB or C# source code is compiled into a .NET assembly. Now keep in mind that the first person to access your site may incur a small performance hit, but then all subsequent requests will benefit from the pre-compiled assembly. If, however, you prefer, you can perform a pre-compilation of the .NET assembly, which essentially reduces some of that performance degradation experienced by the first user. So this is somewhat a more advanced topic, so I'm not going to cover it in this lesson, but be aware that it is available to you. Now, you may be confused as to where the compiled assembly resides. In the past, if you're already a user of ASP.NET 1.0 or 1.1, you could simply view the .dll file, the compiled assembly, in your bin subdirectory for your project. But as we start to nose around within Windows Explorer, we're not going to be able to find it. So let's go ahead and open up Windows Explorer. I'm going to go to the My Documents folder, Visual Studio 2005. We can look in the projects folder and see, for example, lesson 10, but there's very little here. Let's go ahead and look at this from a detail perspective. There's merely the project folder in this particular folder. If we go to the websites folder, we can see that we have a lesson 10 folder as well. And this is the folder that contains the web pages that we're working on. The default.aspx page, the web.config page, and also the app data. But as we look around, there's no bin directory. So where does our compiled assembly reside? Let's go ahead and do this. Let's bring up the search and look for it on our hard drive. Type in lesson 10 and select search. And I'll go ahead and pause the recording while it searches my hard drive. Okay, so it finally found a lesson 10 folder at c:/Windows Microsoft.NET Framework version 2.0 dot whatever temporary ASP.NET files. And if we look inside there and drill down and continue to drill down, we'll eventually find some files. Some of them are of a temporary nature, and some of them, or actually one of them, is the actual assembly that is compiled for our application. And this is somehow mapped by the ASP.NET 2.0 engine back to your .aspx source files. So whenever you run the application on a web server remotely, this will be created for your application, and you won't be able to necessarily see it, but it will be on the server. But don't worry about it. This is not something that you need to know about in order to create applications. This is merely one of those under the hood type topics. So let's go ahead and shut that down, shut this down. Okay, so now we have enough information under our belt to begin developing our ASP.NET 2.0 quiz engine that will allow our users to create an account, to take tests, to review their results, and then keep track of their own personal progress. And we'll be using practically every lesson, every concept that we learned in order to create this application. So if you've been waiting to see how all this stuff fits together, then we're going to start that in the very next video, so stay tuned. Now, if you're enjoying this series, please visit www.learnvisualstudio.net to download hundreds of videos just like this one to help guide you through topics relating to C#, Visual Basic, ASP.NET, and more. Thank you.